Just in the last week, NVIDIA, the stock Wall Street calls the most important on Earth, announced the so-called epic Rubin architecture. But the market reaction was weird. No parabolic spike, no euphoric rally. Instead, it meandered down like a giant with a hangover, quietly drifting lower for a week. To retail investors, that scene looks confusing. On stage, Jensen was hype, showing a chip that does 5 times the inference of the prior generation while slashing cost. So why did billion-dollar fund managers quietly hit sell? Open the sell-side reports and you hear a nasty phrase, the curse of efficiency. Their math is simple. If a job that used to need 100 cards now needs 10, buyers buy fewer cards or demand shrinks, revenue collapses. That's naive. Let me be blunt. The guys in cool conference rooms with spreadsheets made a rookie mistake. They stare at the slightly down K-line and think, the good news has been priced in. Only a very small group who actually understand the industry's dynamics are feeling chills right now, because they saw what Jensen hid behind the dry specs in that 90-minute talk. He wasn't just launching a new product. He was starting a price massacre across the whole industry. He is effectively hacking inference costs down by 90%, a move that looks suicidal on margin for the chip seller, but it is actually life-saving. To figure out who's about to die, you can't just look at the elephant NVIDIA. You have to look at the thousands of ants trembling under its feet, if AI application builders. In the last 2 years, we saw chat explode and Source stun the crowd, and suddenly everyone thought AI was about to rule the world. Tech giants and VCs all did the same thing, or GPS. They shoved hundreds of billions into NVIDIA's pockets and got back racks of hot cards. But let us be honest, behind closed doors, besides selling shovels, NVIDIA made huge money. Who Downstream truly made bank? Not many. I don't mean raised another funding round and look rich on paper. I mean real net profit after you subtract compute, power ops. The answer is brutal, almost none. This is a classic broken input-output equation. Today's industry is a freakish creature, cost structure like aristocrats but revenue streams like beggars. One query can cost a few cents of compute, but the monetization is pennies. Firms fight to attract users with $9.99 a month or free tiers. If you run a restaurant where every bowl of soup costs you $10 more than its price, you can't stay in business. If this mismatch stays, downstream app makers will torch their funding and fail. If apps fail, NVIDIA's trillion-dollar crown sits on quicksand. If that happens, it's not a pullback, it's a collapse, a Silicon Age Great Depression. Jensen understands this better than anyone. So on CES stage he smiled like a rock star, but the string in his chest was taut. He knows, if he doesn't kill the compute price barrier, the game is over. Look back at Rubin's tagline, the inference costs 10 times cheaper, and the line reads differently. Jensen is basically selling Ferrari-level performance for the price of a cheap commuter car. Monopolists usually squeeze prices slowly. They milk margins. Jensen did the opposite. He started violent deflation, essentially. He's offering Santa's pardon to the starving downstream. Imagine you run OpenAI Chat Plus at $20 per month used to be losing money because heavy users burn $15 in compute. You couldn't drop price, but now Jensen says compute cost is a tenth. That $15 becomes $1.50. Can you slash the price to $2? If you do, the user base doesn't just multiply 10x. It explodes exponentially. This is the Jevons paradox at work. Wall Street frets that efficiency equals less card demand. History shows the opposite. Once a core input gets cheap enough, demand floods in. What improved steam engine efficiency? Coal consumption didn't fall, it skyrocketed. Because steam power got used everywhere. Jensen is betting that cheap enough compute will open use cases nobody dared to build before. Today AI is used to write a little copy. Tomorrow your fridge, your Havoc, even your doorknob will have an embedded large model. AI will move from a luxury to a utility like tap water. Rubin is NVIDIA's way of using short-term margin pain to fix the unit economics across the whole stack. But that's just layer 1. There's a deeper strategic shift baked into this violent price cut. Jensen's not simply making chips faster, he's repositioning the company. If the first half of the industry was we sell training rigs, the second half is we bill for inference. Rubin's inference went up 5x while training only rose approximately 3.5x. That gap isn't random. It shows anxiety. NVIDIA wants to pivot from a training-dominated world sold to a handful of giants into an inference-dominated one by billions. Training is a high-ticket, concentrated market. Only a few players can buy racks of H100s. That ceiling's low. Once the big players finish their models, training demand collapses. To double valuation, Jensen must become the electric company. He wants to sell daily power, not one-off generators. If training was a sale to 10 giant miners, inference is a market for 8 billion people. That's the opportunity. To force the world into the inference era, Jensen did something else. He opened the gate. He opened source models. People thought, wait, Jensen gave away models. Is he suddenly charitable? No. This is a move aimed at Google and Tesla. Give out great models for free so everyone builds on them, but make the models run best on CUDA and NVIDIA hardware. Developers will adopt the code, the toolchain, the optimizations. Once your stack assumes CUDA, you're effectively married to NVIDIA silicon. It's like handing out free razor blades that only fit your handle. Open source models do two things. They annihilate the barrier to entry for app builders so demand for inference grows huge, and they lock those builders into NVIDIA's ecosystem. Even if Google or AMD tries to undercut on price, switching costs are massive because your code now uses Jensen's name at the lowest level. This is an industry sovereignty play shifting who dictates the rules of the AI economy. At this point you should feel a chill. NVIDIA's combination play is ruthless. In business school we'd call this self-cannibalization. Jensen is willing to kill the old high-margin NVIDIA in order to grow a new, deeper NVIDIA that permeates the physical world. He knows if he doesn't cut prices first, Google, Meta, or Musk's dojo will build the cheap path later, and then NVIDIA ends up playing catch-up by becoming the next Intel, sitting on past glories while losing ground. For investors, Rubin is not bad news. It has a clear signal. The arms race is over. We reign brutal industrialization. In this new phase, don't swallow the hype but check the unit economics. You can turn cheap compute into actual profit. Those are the winners. So who loses first? Those guys who hoarded prior gen cards and tried to profit by renting compute are the compute landlords. Their model is a ticking balance sheet time bomb. When new chips cut costs by 90%, why rent my old hot, power-hungry card? Their assets devalue in a flash. That means massive impairments and forced write-downs for companies stuffed with used H100s. Rule number 1, avoid pure GPU arbitrage resale rental plays. The winners are companies suffocating under compute costs, says players who can finally make margins, and what Jensen kept hinting at. Physical AI, robots and autonomous driving need real-time, low-latency inference at low power. Previously, models were too fat and hot. Rubin solves the key blocker. 2026 might well be the year embodiment intelligence becomes real. So stop staring at cloud LLM plays only. Look at companies doing edge inference, robot platforms, smart home devices. Jensen's price cut clears the last mile into the physical world. That's a market 100 times bigger than checked. So keep it simple. Sell the shovel people and buy the miners. Sell the old landowners and buy the explorers of the new world. Tech revolutions ask a brutal question. Can you deliver cheaper than the old way? Jensen is popping the overpriced bubble to build a longer-lasting kingdom. He's turning from arms dealer into the global grid operator. For you, that means the buy-and-forget luck days are gone. You must get colder and more professional. Seek the firms that turn AI into production profit, not the ones still selling bright PPT dreams. This small-to-large shift is also a geopolitical pivot. Jensen's sovereign compute strategy reworks global trade flows. He's not just selling parts. NVIDIA's Salesforce is now a diplomatic mission, selling national AI infrastructure. Countries don't want their data and crucial AI workloads sitting in foreign hands. They want domestic capabilities. Rubin reduces the cost of building national compute centers into a budget many countries can swallow. Once a country's data center runs NVIDIA stacks and its programmers adapt to NVIDIA supplied models in local languages, you've effectively signed a decades-long binding. This is much more than a sale. It's a power treaty in code. This structural reallocation flips the markets. In the hoarding era, investors panicked if they couldn't buy compute, thus they chased hardware assets. In the deflation era, Jensen is tearing apart scarcity. The brutal finance truth. If a company borrowed to buy $1 billion in GPS, its interest costs are fixed. But those GPS market value just fell 80% overnight. That math breaks balance sheets. That's why Wall Street sellers hit the exit. They realize the hardware premium bubble is over. Valuation criteria are shifting from how many cards do you own to how much real profit can you generate. This pain is necessary. Think of the late 19th century electrification, early headlines hype generator makers, and polls. But real fortunes came from appliances and factories that use cheap electricity, light bulbs, washing machines, elevators. Jensen is closing the old faucet that let hardware vendors make outsized returns and opening a reservoir for apps to drink. He'll sacrifice gross margin now in order to make AI cheap like water, because only when compute is nearly free will the 10 million Edisons appear. That's why 2026 is the real birth year of physical AI. Robots previously looked cool but clumsy. Their brains were too expensive. Running real-time perception could consume more power than the robot's motors. Rubin's 1/10 inference cost and efficiency is like fitting a tiny, fast, low-power superbrain into every robot. When that happens, tasks once cheaper by human labor suddenly flip economics. Automation becomes not just cool but cheaper. That will trigger a manufacturing and logistics revolution even bigger than chat. But most ordinary investors are stuck in confusion during this wealth shuffle. Some panic sell NVIDIA on short-term volatility, others cling to old winners and try to buy fading old compute assets. That timing lag is the killer in a deflationary market. In inflationary times you could buy and sleep, inflation props everything up. In deflation, only businesses with real positive unit economics and sustainable cash flows survive. Jensen's self-harm price cut is an industry stress test. He wants to squeeze out speculators and keep only the builders. If you step back, NVIDIA is no longer just a chipmaker. It's mutating into a kind of digital central bank. It doesn't print money, but it supplies compute, and compute is the purchasing power of this era. By managing compute rates, price, and supply, Jensen actually paces global AI innovation. When he thinks the market is frothy, he drops prices and forces speculators out. When he wants to stimulate, he releases more open models and lowers barriers to build. This centralized influence is unprecedented, thrilling, and terrifying. So in this second half race, your mindset must flip 180 degrees. Stop watching daily candlesticks. That's noise from fear and greed. Look at the factories rolling autonomous trucks, the apps integrating cheap on-device inference, the drug labs simulating proteins in hours instead of years. Jensen has cut the ticket price to the future. The question now is whether your imagination, your grasp of scenarios, and your business judgment can claim real value. When we take the view beyond chip specs and quarterly filings, a darker truth emerges. At this 2026 nodal point, NVIDIA made a leap from ARM's merchant to mint. People argue about PV and stock price, but those debates live in old valuation frameworks. Those who see the loop understand Jensen is running a global compute arbitrage. By laying sovereign compute foundations, he's indirectly taking over countries' digital lifelines. When smaller nations, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Latin America build national data centers and adopt NVIDIA stack, NVIDIA stops being a commodity chip vendor and becomes a gatekeeper. You can't reasonably give a price multiple to a digital sovereign gatekeeper. That shift sparks a 2026 survival migration in the US AI sector. The death list becomes clearer. Besides the compute landlords, next in line are the fake AI companies that slapped a chat UI on old products. For 2 years, lots of firms launched AI versions with a simple API wrapper and saw valuation spike. Rubin's violent deflation slices that illusion. When basic generative capabilities are cheap and ubiquitous, players without deep vertical data or defensible moats face dual humiliation, revenue decay, and valuation vaporization. The democratization of compute is essentially a death blow to pure speculation. Capital then flows quickly to the survivors, those who turn cheap compute into non-consensus value. Biopharma and materials science are prime examples. Rubin's efficiency in inference collapses long simulation timelines into days or hours. For these firms, NVIDIA's price drop isn't margin compression. It's an exponential productivity leap. That's the hidden gems to chase in 2026. On geopolitics, Jensen's sovereign compute approach builds a clever buffer between US markets and global trade frictions, even amid export controls. Markets and countries building their own sovereign AI infrastructure on NVIDIA create deep ties. Hitting NVIDIA isn't just a hit on a company. It's like pulling the plug on a dozen digital brains. That complexity makes policy moves costly, which is why long-term institutional capital still clings to NVIDIA and its ecosystem. They aren't buying cards, they're buying system-level stability. But we must be sober. Violent deflation forces a brutal cognitive baptism for retail investors. The days of buy the rumor, ride the hype are over. When compute ceases to be a barrier, company value depends on fundamentals. Can you solve a concrete industry pain? Do you own irreplaceable data? Is your user stickiness resilient to price wars? Jensen's Rubin peels away vanity metrics. The market returns to unit economics. Many will fail this test. The winners will be those who master the new rules. So your safe harbor isn't a ticker. It's a framework that can spot this technical deflation dynamic. Jensen is tearing down walls not to wreck the industry, but to create a new, long-lived order under his rules. The new game: hardware is the carrier, ecosystem is the crown. Efficiency is the ticket to throne. If you get that code, you're already in a prime observation seat in history's biggest race shuffle.